What is that?
Yeah, it's say and explain.
Good question. It is something where they they'll cup your what do you call it,
Half
calves and your knees and your
to create
what
a new vein, capillaries.
what happens is it massages your legs,
Yeah.
your
Yeah.
thighs and till your buttocks, and it creates new capillaries for your heart.
Mm.
Oh, I see. But that's painful, no, Leslie?
Yeah, it's very
No,
famous in
no,
India.
it's very famous in. It's not really painful. You can bear the pain. It's not so bad. You just Google EECP. It's very common in India apparently.
Yeah.
Why do you
And
do that? New capillaries for the heart? How does it help?
yeah, because of the pressure, because they always consider your calves like a second heart. That's why they always want people to
Oh,
exercise. They
oh,
always want people to exercise because you're
oh,
exercising your calves, and that creates more what do you call it, vessels and all that. So what happens is
oh, I
the you
see.
see, pardon?
I'm listening.
See what happens is we realized that if I was supposed to go for a bypass, I rejected that, and I was supposed to go for the stenting, and I rejected that too. And then this came
Oh,
about. This came
oh,
about, and it's very good for a lot of people. It's very good for people who are even older,
oh,
because what happens is we
Or
real,
younger.
we realize that
oh,
have when you go for a bypass, it doesn't clear your blocks. When you
oh, I
when you
see.
go for when you go for a stenting, it doesn't clear your blocks. But when
Oh,
and you
I
go
see.
for this ECP, it also doesn't clear your blocks, but it creates a lot of new capillaries in your heart.
Oh, I see.
It's very common in India, and it's very
Uh-huh.
cheap in India. Even people
Oh, I
like 50 years old, 40 years, they can do it. And the beauty of it is when we heard testimonies of many people,
mm,
it even helps you with your liver, your kidneys, your hair growth, your muscles, because new capillaries are pushing blood to
yeah.
your whole system. It's
Okay.
actually revitalizing your system, which is very good.
Oh, I see. Okay.
Ah.
So you in Malaysia?
Yeah, we can do it. We are doing it here. It's common in India as well as in China and all.
China.
It's very common.
Mm,
They don't encourage it because the reason being they cannot make money. The hospitals cannot, cardiologists cannot make money if you do this. It's so much cheaper. So they do not encourage this, and they
People,
don't
you're
want you to
telling
know
me
about it.
it has
Pardon?
lots of benefits.
Yes.
ECP, read about it.
You just read about it. It's
Mm.
fantastic. It's fantastic. It will help in other
Thanks for
areas too.
telling
That's
me
the
about it.
beauty.
Thanks for telling me about it. I'll just read about it. Because
Yeah,
that
please
is
read
not
about.
advertised here in India. I don't read about it in the newspapers and all. Yeah,
They
as you
don't.
said.
Hold on, yeah. I think Raf is here. Maybe we can get started first. Yeah, we can chat later.
Yeah, we could go into it. It was important information being shared. But I'll say, like, we're in such like a great time because we're in the time of Purim, right? We're in this amazing,
Yeah.
we're in this amazing time of Purim. And when we talk about like the power of this time, the energy of this time, we're saying that that this mitzvah, right, the mitzvah of keeping this whole experience of Purim will allow us to basically it says almost as like you're keeping the entire Torah, right? Between the fasting and the Mishalach Manot to the reading of the different dynamics. So we're like entering a time of healing, right? This month of Elul, this month of Adar is connected to Elul, right? It's 9 months separation is a big connection, but also this month of Nisan, right? This whole time is right about rejuvenation, recreating, starting fresh, creating a new paradigm in one's life. And so in this time that when we think about the human soul, right? Because we always got to think about how does the soul fit into this? When we say it's almost like keeping the entire Torah, we're saying that the Torah itself, the human soul itself, is broken into 613 parts, right? And out of these 613 parts, you know, those 613 parts, they're divided in 248 and in 365, right? And so this human soul fits perfectly with the human body that's also made in this way, 245 limbs and 365 organs and tissues, all types of stuff, right? So that's how the body is designed. The body is designed in conjunction with the soul, and the Torah is in conjunction with the body and the soul. And not only that, in the upper worlds, like in the upper levels, the worlds of Absolute, the higher worlds, there's even a spiritual body that of, right? Which is a whole big conversation. But the point is during this time of Pesach, that it's a time of getting better, getting prepared to receive this light of transformation, right? Even the month of ER, which is after the month of Nisan, right? We're in the month of Adar now. The month of Nisan is next. And after that is ER. ER is also about healing, right? So ER, there's the whole process going to the Torah. So like now is the time to start praying for other people. Now is to start asking for Hashem to protect other people, healing anything you need for yourself. You think about people in your life that need the same thing, right? And you focus on those people, and through that you receive, right? But along with that, we have technology. We have Purim, we have Pesach, we have the Omer, we have Shavuot, right? So we have all these amazing technologies that are here with us right now, right? So the thing is like this, okay? So we're going to read and we're going to turn, because there's so much to learn about Purim, right? We could spend like so much. I've been spending the last 2 weeks going over Purim, and all you guys should subscribe to my YouTube channel, because the YouTube channel has our classes, so you could review classes we had before, but also all the other classes that I do. I do close to 3 or 4 classes a day. A lot of it is Kabbalah, a lot of it is Musar, but I'm doing a whole series on Purim. So we're dealing with the scroll, we're dealing with the halakha, we're dealing with the fast of Esther, but I'm dealing with it from the historical standpoint. So you get to learn how they did it during the times of the temple, during the times of Babylon, all the way to now, right? So I'm just going through the history of these different eras. Mishalach Manot, right? That whole experience, like giving gifts to the poor, giving gifts to people, all that has a historical precedence too. So what we're going to deal with today is part of that series. And we're going to learn about Esther and Mordechai. Who are these people? What is their dynamic and what is their heritage? So we're going to start, it's a sefer that was written, you know, hundreds of years ago, called Legend of the Jews, right? And it goes through different parts of Jewish history, but one of the parts it focuses on is the book of Esther and the situation of Purim. So we're going to learn from that sefer. Baruch Hashem, it's really exciting. If you guys want, I did a class earlier today on the Suda, right? On the Suda Purim and the dynamics of the Suda Purim, and basically not the details of the halakha, but more so the dynamic of what is the significance of the Suda, which is one of the main mitzvahs, right? And I would suggest that all you guys, not only should you look at the videos I've done in the past on Purim in the last couple of weeks, but also you should just consult with your local Orthodox rabbi, you know, on how you guys plan on doing things, right? Because Purim for us is on Shabbat, so we can't read Megillah, so we got to read it the day before. It's a whole bunch of stuff going on, right? So that's what we're dealing with over here in Jerusalem. And so you guys need to consult with your rabbi to see what specific things you guys need to do, because Purim is unique this year. So you guys may have to have your Suda a little bit earlier, right? On Friday, because you guys are on the 14th, so it'll be Thursday night, right? So you have a meal Thursday night, and then you also have a meal during the daytime, but earlier, because you don't want to mess with Shabbat, right, which is Friday night, right? So Thursday night you have a meal, Friday during the day, early during the day. There's a machlokas how late you should do it, right? But I can't paskin for you guys in India, right? You guys in Indonesia, these places, you guys have to talk to rabbis there, and they tell you exactly how you guys are going to do it in that place. If you're in Jerusalem, I'll tell you how we're doing in Jerusalem, and I would be in conjunction with all the other rabbis in Jerusalem because we're on the 15th, right? We're not on the 14th. We're in a walled city, which is a whole conversation. But let's talk about Esther and Mordecai. Two people I feel very connected to, for obvious reasons. And we're going to understand like more about them, whatever. But before we get into that exactly, I want us to be up to speed on where we're at on this story, right? So the thing is like this. The Jews are living in a place called Shushan. There's a whole bunch of things that have happened. And long story short, there's this king that's in Persia. His name is Ahasuerus. And he's basically a nobody who somehow gets himself into power, and he's in his position in his his goals. He's an insecure guy. So he goes from, this, trying to win over people. Like basically what happened at this moment in the story, right, is that there was a revolt against Ahasuerus. How did Ahasuerus become into power? It's a whole story, and we'll be here for an hour explaining how the power of Nebuchadnezzar got took over by Vashti's father. There's a whole thing, right? So at this moment in the story, the Jews are living in Shushan, and Ahasuerus has a revolt against him. He has 127 providences, and some of the people revolted against his leadership, and he destroyed them. So he wanted to throw a party to celebrate it. But along with that party also came this dynamic of the prophecy of also celebrating not only did he destroy his enemies, but even the prophecy that the Jews would return to Israel was also seemed like it was not going to happen either. So what he wanted to do was basically celebrate the fact that he was on top of the world and he was a new leader of the world. Even he created sculptures and thrones like King Solomon. He was showing off the wealth that was collected by the kingdom that had nothing to do with him, right? And so this was this guy's life. And so the Jews come and they want to create peace, these types of things with them, whatever. So they come to this meal and they celebrate. I mean, it's just disgusting. They even have gold plates and goblets from the temple, and they're using it to drink out of. It's just a really bad situation, right? And so this party keeps going further and further and further. And obviously Mordecai is his character, and we're going to find out more about who he is and who Esther is. And he's there, right? And long story short, that in this story, it gets to the point where this guy Ahasuerus wants to show his supreme leadership, and he tries to get his wife to basically do what Kanye West's wife did at the Grammys, which is take off all of her clothes in front of everybody. And she refused to do it because she was a woman of dignity, much different than Kanye West's wife, right? And so she didn't do that. And because of that, it created a whole situation where it was this whole spiral effect, and she starts telling him he's nobody, and eventually she gets killed. And so we're picking up at that moment where the beginning of this process of Esther comes into reality, but the concept of Esther allows us to start this conversation of Mordecai and Esther. And who are they? And what is their significance to us in Jewish history? And so that's where we're going to go. So Mordecai, notice they don't have the H, by the way. It's a Chai. Mordecai is the descendant of Mordecai, and of his niece his niece Esther is disposed in a few words in the scripture. But he could trace all of it back to the patriarchs of Jacob, from whom he was of Mordecai, the only ancestor of his who mentioned in the name is Shimri, and he mentioned for a specific reason. He says this Shimri is none other than the notorious son of Gara, the rebel who had so scoffed and mocked at David fleeting before Absalom that he would have been killed by Abasiah if David did not generously infer in his favor. Okay, so apparently Mordecai's father was a guy named Shimei, and he was a son of Gar, and this guy Gar mocked. He had a whole issue with David, who was fleeing for him his son. You remember the story? And he would have been killed by if David did not have favor. David, prophetic eye, discerned in Shimri, the ancestor of Israel, savior in the time of Ahasuerus. So David saw that this guy, who wasn't the best guy, would his son would be huge. For this reason, he dealt lenient with him. And on his deathbed, he bade his son Solomon and to reserve vengeance until Simri should have reached an old age and could begot no more children. Thus, Mordecai deserved both the Apopesines and the Binyamites and the Judeans, for he owed his existence not only to the actual Binyamites, the forebears, but also on the side of of David, who was an ancestry who kept his ancestry Shimei alive. So he's talking about Mordecai's beginning, right? So Mordecai's uh, um, grandfather, in essence, had an issue with King David. And so King David could have took him out, but he decided not to because he had prophecy and he saw in the future that he would have a descendant that was going to save Israel, and so he didn't do it. And so he says, and he told his son Solomon, "Do not take any vengeance on this guy Shimri." Hopefully, I'm saying his name right. And he should not say he should not take any vengeance on him because he should not take vengeance on him until he's an old man that he can't have children anymore. Right? And so he's saying that Mordecai, because of that, he was indebted to Judah, and obviously he was indebted to his lineage, which was the Binyamites, right? Which obviously descends from Rachel. So you have Rachel and Leah in this situation, right? Leah being the progenitor of David Amalek, or part of that lineage, and then you have Rachel, who is this was a mother of Binyamin. Right, so they're saying Mordecai grew up with this relationship where he felt indebted to the Binyamites as his forebear, but also to the Judeans. He says Shimri distinction as an ancestor of Israel, redeemer, was due to the merits of his wife. When Jonah in Asmazi, David's spies in the war against his son, fled before the Mediadones of Asbus and Absalom. They were at the gate of Shimri's house open. They found the gates of Shimri's house open. Entering it, they concealed themselves as well, and they escaped. They escaped detection due to the ruse of Shimri's pious wife. She quickly transformed the well into a lady's chamber, and when Absalom men's came in looking about, they descended from searching the place because that reason. That the men as saintly as Jonathan and Amos would have taken refuge in a private apartment of a woman. God determined that for having rescued two pious men, that he would reward her with two pious descendants that would invert the ruins of Israel. So they're saying this merit that Mordecai being born to this family, that this guy who obviously had a problem with King David, which you could assume that means he was not righteous, but he came actually because of the merit of his mother, because his mother protected people who are of righteousness. And she did that, and she saved them through this whole conflict. On the mother's side, Mordecai was in very deed a member of the tribe of Judah. In any event, he was the son of Judah in the true sense of the word. He publicly acknowledged himself as a Jew. He refused to touch of the forbidden foods which Ahasuerus set before the guests at his banquet. His other don't know, that likewise point to his piety and his excellence. His name Mordechai, for instance, is constant of more, meaning ma'ar, right? And Dekai, pure. And he was refined and noble as pure as more. Okay, so let's understand this. So my name is Mordechai, right? So more is in the frame of the spices that cleanse the temple, right? More. So they used the more as a spice, they burnt it as a carbonas to cleanse the temple, right? Right? And so the word dekai means pure, or pure or to be cleansed. And so when you bring Mordechai together, the word dekai also has the gematria, right? Meaning the numerical value of the word sofek, which means doubt. And so the name Mordechai, when I received the name Mordechai, it was a name that was given to me as a spiritual instrument that every time I heard the name Mordechai, it would remove any doubt. It would cleanse any doubt of what I'm supposed to do in this generation, how I'm supposed to impact, right? And so this is the idea of Mordechai. Mordechai is to cleanse doubt. And even during the time of Purim, of Sushan, what did the Jews do? They fasted, they cleansed themselves, and they changed the degree. He says again, he is called Ben Ja'ar because he illuminated the eyes of Israel, and Ben Kish because when he knocked down the gates of the divine mercy, when he opened upon him, he was likewise the origin of his name Ben Shemai. I'm sorry, Ben Shemi, for his father's name, for he had heard God who offered up prayers. Another of Mordecai's dynamics was his name was is Baal Shahan, the master of languages. Being a member of the great Sanhedrin, he understood all the 70 languages spoken in the world. More than that, he knew the language of the deaf mutes. And once it happened that no new grain would be obtained at Passover time. A deaf mute came and pointed out with one hand on the roof, with the other on the cottage, and Mordecai understood that the sign meant that the localization of the name of Giod Ziphirim, the cottage roofs, and lo, new grain was found there for the Omer offering. On another occasion, a deaf mute pointed out on one hand to his eyes, with the other the staple of the bow on that the door of Mordecai understood that he meant a place called Isor, a dry well for an eye. So Mordecai was a part of the great assembly. It was obviously a humongous Talmid Chacham. He knew all Torah Kula. He knew all of everything, right? And he was a master of language. And he said that he says, in his eye was a spring of the same word. In Aramaic, in Sighet also have a double meaning, staple. Mordecai belonged to the highest aristocracy of Jerusalem. Woo, Jerusalem. And he said, and he was of the royal blood. And for he deported to Babylon together with King Jenica and by Nebuchadnezzar, who at the time exalted only the great of the land. Later he returned to Palestine, where he remained only for a time. He preferred to live in the diaspora and watch over the education of Esther. When Cyrus and Darius captured Babylon, Mordecai and Daniel and the Jewish people of the conquered city accompanied King Cyrus to Shushan, where Mordecai establishes yeshiva. So this is Mordecai. Now, during the fast of Esther, okay, when you go back into those classes I've done before, you'll see that I bring sources that teach that during the fast of Esther, we have the ability to bring the spiritual qualities of Esther and Mordecai into our life, into the reality for all of humanity and for our families. She says, okay, so Esther, the beauty and piety. She says, Esther, so now we're going to learn about Esther, right? So Esther, the birth of Esther caused the death of her mother. Her father had died a little while before, so she was entirely orphaned. Mordecai and his wife interested themselves in the poor babe. His wife became her nurse, and he himself did not hesitate when there was need for it, to do services for the child that only performed only by women. I don't know what that means. Okay. He says both names, Esther as well as Hadassah, are derived from Hadassah or Metor, which she is called because of her good deeds spared her fame abroad. As sweet fragrances of the myrtle preserved, persevered, they're in the air in which it grows. In general, the myrtle is symbolic to the pious because as the myrtle is evergreen, summer and winter alike, so the saints never suffered dishonored either in the world or in the world to come. In another way, Esther resembled the myrtle, which, in spite of its pleasant scent, has the bitter taste. Esther was pleasant to the Jews, but bitterness itself to Haman and all who belonged to him. His name, Esther, is equally significant. In Hebrew, it means she who conceals, asar. And he says, and it's fitting to the name for his is a fitting name for the niece of Mordecai, a woman who well knew how to guard a secret and to long hide her descent in the faith from the king of the court. She herself had been kept concealed for years in the house of her uncle, withdrawn from the searching eyes of the king's spies. Above all, she was hidden light and suddenly shone upon Israel in its rayest darkness. In build, Esther was neither tall nor short. She was exactly average height. Another reason for calling her Martel, a plant, which is likely neither large or small. At the point at the at In the point of fact, Esther was not a beauty in the real sense of the word. The beholder was bewitched by her grace and her charm, and in spite of her somewhat shallow myrtle-like complexion, more than this, her enchantment grace was not the grace of youth. She was 75 years old when she came to the court. Wow. And the captives and captivated the hearts of all who saw her, and the king of Umcha. And this was in the fulfillment of the prophecy which God made to Abraham, which when he was leaving the home of his father. Thou out, this is what he says, thou out of the father of the age of 75. As this is when he says Lech Lecha, when Abraham was 75, as thou, the deliverer of the children in the Medina, shall also be 75 years old. Another historical event pointed forward to Esther's achievement when the Jews, after the destruction of Jerusalem, broke out into a well. We are the orphans, the fatherless. God said, a very smooth and redeemer I shall bring upon you in the Medina, who will also be an orphan and fatherless mother. He says, Achashverosh. He says, put Esther between two groups of beauties, Midianite beauties to the right of her and the Persian beauties to the left of her. Yet Esther, the comeliness outsoared all of them. Not even Joseph could vibe with the Jewish queen in grace. The grace was suspended above all, but Esther was fairly Latin down with it. Whoever saw her pronounced her the ideal of beauty of a nation. The general explanation was, this one is worthy of being a queen. The vein of Achashverosh sought a wife for 4 years in the vain. In vain, father has spent the money in bringing their daughters to him. in hopes that one or the other would appeal to his fancy. None among the maidens were none among the women pleased Ahasuerus, but scarcely he had eyes set upon Esther. When he thrilled with the fleeing, he had he had he had found that what had he been longing for years. So this is the thing. So everybody in the kingdom is trying to bring their daughter to Ahasuerus, right? Everyone wants to be a part of the royal level. Everybody wants to be a part of this. And so now, for some reason, and you got to think about it, Esther is 75. This is crazy. You know what I mean? Like, you think Esther is like 19 or something. You know what I mean? She was 75, according to this. Okay, so none of them pleased, but scarcely he has eyes set upon Esther, who thrilled with feeling, and he had at last found what he had yearned for. He says, in these years portrayed of Vashti's had hung in his chamber, he had not forgotten his rejected queen. But once he beheld Esther's, Vashti's picture was replaced by hers. The maiden grace and the womanly charm in her, with her in her unity. He says, in the change in her worldly possessions wrought no name in Esther's ways and manners. She retained her beauty unto her old age. So the queen remained as pure in mind and soul as never simple maiden had been. And all the other women who entered the gates of the royal palace engaged, demand fathers' demeanors continued modest and unassumingly. The others insisted that the 7 girls pages assigned to them would have certain particular qualities as they should not differ, each from her mistress in complication and height. I mean, in complexion and height. Esther uttered no wish whatsoever. But her unpretending ways were far from pleasing to Higia, the chief of the eunuch of Haram. He feared lest the king discover that Esther did nothing to preserve her beauty and would put the blame upon himself as an accusation that he might bring him to the gallows. To avoid such a fate, he loaded Esther down with jewelry and distinguishing her beyond all the other women gathered in the palace as Joseph by means of costly gifts lavished upon her. He singled out her ancestors Benjamin among the brethren. Okay, so there's a lot that's happened right now. So right now they're going through this process of how Esther became, right? And the different people that had agendas around, because we're going into the backside of the politics. Hagida paid particular attention to what Esther ate. For her, he brought dishes of the royal table, which, however, he refused, abstaining from such. Only such things past her lips were permitted to Jews. She lived entirely on vegetables, food, as Hanashina, Mashrael, Azrael, and Phoros had done in the court of Abuchadnezzar. The forbidden Titus. So she kept kosher. She passed over to the non-Jews servants. And she says in her personal attendants were 7 Jewish maidens who consistently piously as herself and who devoted to the ritual laws Esther would depend on. So Esther got rid of all the Jews and she hired all Jewish girls. Otherwise, Joshua was cut off from all the intercourse with Jews, and she was in danger of forgetting when the Sabbath bath came around, and therefore she adopted the devices of giving her 7 maidens particular names to keep her in mind of the passing of time. For the first one was called Hulat, workday, and she was attendant upon her on Sunday. On Monday, a servant was called Roitka, to remind her of Roika, the firmament, Rakia, the firmament. And she says, and she was created on the second, which was created on the second day of the world. Tuesday was called Gituna, the garden. the third day of creation, which produced the world of plants. On Wednesday, she reminded by Nitsuhara Rita, which is the illumination. That was the day of when the God made the luminaries. It shed the light, the sun and the moon. On Thursday, it was Rishu Shatiya, the movement on the fifth day, in which she animated the beings were created on Friday, and the day in which the beasts came into creation. So it's interesting. On the sixth day of creation, just to fill in this point, on the sixth day of creation, God created in the beginning of that day beast, on the second day of that of animal. Okay. So he says, on the day the beast came into being by Hitira, right? Little image. And he says, and on Shabbat, her bidding was done by, he says, Rigo ita, rest. He said, and this was sure to remember the day of rest. So she was so engulfed in the secular world. She was so not in a Jewish environment that she was so scared that she would lose sight of the time and the days. So she had 7 Jewish maidservants that reminded her of the 7 days of the week, which is a building block for Shabbos, right? He says Mordecai daily visit to the gate of the palace was at a similar purpose. Thus Esther was afforded the opportunity of obtaining instructions from him on all ritual doubts that might assail her. This lively interest displayed by Mordecai in Esther's physical and spiritual welfare is not only attributable to an uncle and a guardian in solitude in behalf of an orphan niece. Is a much closer bond. He bond between husband and wife united them for when Esther had grown to maidhood. Mordecai had exposed her. Naturally, Esther would have been ready to defend her conjugal honors with her life. She gladly had suffered the death of the hands of the king's lawlessness rather than yield herself to a man not her husband. Luckily, there was no need for the sacrifice. Her marriage with Ahasuerus was of a foreign union. God sent down a female spirit in the guise of Esther to take place of the king. Esther herself never lived with Ahasuerus, his wife. So this is a high level. So they're saying when she was with her, when bottom line is Esther, according to our tradition, Esther was never with Ahasuerus. God sent down an image, a shadim that looked like Esther, and that's who she lived with. At the advice of her uncle, Esther kept her distance and her faith a secret. Mordecai, in injunction, it was dictated by several motivations. First of all, it was his modesty that suggested the secrecy. He thought the king, if he heard from Esther that she had been raised by him, might offer install him in a high office. At in point, in fact, Mordecai was right in his conjuncture. Ahasuerus had pledged himself to make lords, princes, and kings of Esther's friends and king's people if she would have named them. So Mordecai was like, he didn't want the clout. Another reason for keeping Esther's Jewish affiliation a secret was Mordecai was apprehensive that the fate of Vashti overtake Esther too. If he were to store her, he desired at least to guard her against the Jews becoming her fellow sufferers. Besides, Mordecai knew only too well that the imminent feelings entertained by the heathen towards Jews never since their exile in the land. So he knew that, these non-Jews hate us. And he says, in fear that the Jew haters and the gravity of their hostility against Jews might bring about the ruins of Esther and her house. The mindful period which Esther was exposed, Mordecai allowed no day to pass without assuring herself of her well-being. So they talked every day. He was guiding her. He says, this comprehension therefore came to God. Thou makest the well of a single soul. They may emanate concerning that thou live well-being. The good of the whole nation shall be entrusted to thee as thy task, and to reward him for modesty. God said, thou reward thyself from greatness to loves, and I will honor thee more than the men on the earth. He says, vain were their efforts made by Achashverosh to draw her secret from Esther. He arranged great festivals for the purpose, but she guarded it well. She had an answer ready for most of his insistent questions. I know neither my people nor my family. I've lost my parents in the earliest infancy. But as a king desires greatly to show himself gracious of the nation in which of which the queen belongs. He released all the people under his dominion from the payment of taxes and imposts, and in this way he thought her nation was bound to benefit. So Esther was on point, right? She was on point. This is showing you what she had to go through and how she had to maneuver. It wasn't so easy for her. And when the king saw that the kindness of the generosity left her untouched, he saw that the risk of the secret the secret from her by threats. Once she parried his inquiry in the customary ways, saying, I am of an orphan, and God, the father of my fatherless, in mercy has brought me up, and he's restored it, and I shall gather virgins together the second time. His purpose was to provoke the jealousy of Esther, for the women, for a woman is jealous of nothing, such as a rival. So he was trying to manipulate her. When Mordecai noticed that the women were being brought to his courtyard, he was overwhelmed with anxiety for his niece, thinking that the fate of Vashti might befall her, and he was impelled to make quick inquiry. He says, and for Esther herself, she was following the example of her race. She could keep silent in all modesty, as Rachel and the mother of Benjamin had to keep modesty silent when her father gave her sister Leah to Jacob for a wife instead of herself, and Saul, as the Benjamite, was modest, reserved when questioned by his uncle when he was about to find that his she asked was but nothing but the elevation of kingship. Rachel and Shaul were recompensed for their self and indignation by giving of the descendants like Esther. Okay, so we'll stop here, and that's just going into this idea of Esther, Mordecai. Who are these characters? So this is like, I don't know if it's an introduction, but you're clear on who they were and what they were up dealing with, and this is what the basis of this. So you know who Vashti is, you know who Achashverosh is, you know who Esther is, and you know who Mordecai is. Any thoughts, points, reflections, any ideas?
Interesting enough. Sorry, enough.
Yeah, it's okay.
Very, very, very interesting. Sorry about that.
Yeah, it's a lot of deep stuff. A lot of deep stuff. That this is like this particular sefer that we're reading is the history of the Jews, which is a lot of midrashic work on the Book of Esther or the Scroll of Esther. So anyway, so you guys, we have to do. I wish we had did more classes during the week, because if we did more classes, we could do more, right? So all I can do now, when we do one class a week, is to deal with it on a general level. But if anybody wants to be a part of any of the classes during the week, just reach out, and I'll send Rivka a link, and you guys could join in, whatever. But we're going to continue on learning about this amazing thing. And I just in closing, we want to just have in mind, all the people. I should have said it before, but my Rosh Yeshiva, I started when I came to Israel. I came to Or Sameach, which was one of the top yeshivas in the world, and I was able to be there for 4.5 years. And our Rosh Yeshiva passed away over Shabbat, or right before Shabbat, Rabbi Schiller, and he was a humongous person. And so I just wanted to, have this shir, in mind, and all the Torah that was shared, being his merit. I should have said it before, but it's just, I'm just dealing with it right now. I just found out about it like literally several hours ago. Anyways, but the point is just saying like this, we should have in mind all the Rabbi Schiller and all the people that he I mean, literally tens of thousands of people. I can't even imagine how many people, hundreds of thousands of people that he's responsible, or played a role in their frumkeit. So, anyways, so we'll just continue on. Rabbi Shiller should be blessed. His family should be comforted. All of his Talmidim should be comforted. And we should only know good news, and we should see Mechayeh HaMetim very soon. Baruch atah Adonai, le'olam, amen ve'amen.
Amen.
Amen. You guys have a great week, and we don't
You
talk.
too.
Chag Sameach, have a beautiful Purim, and God willing, we'll see each other next week.